What can turn a normal needed health food substance into a dangerous killer? Come on, and how can something that makes sex hormones, helps build cell walls, and contributes to strong bones also choke off oxygen and damage vital organs and tissues? It's cholesterol, a white waxy kind of a fat that is manufactured in our bodies. It's cholesterol. There's both hero and villain. But we cannot live without it. In excessive amounts, it can kill us. Take heart disease, for instance. There's usually nothing wrong with the myocardium, the heart muscle itself. The problem usually resides inside the coronary arteries, these arteries sitting on top of the heart. Their function is to deliver the needed oxygen and other nutrients to the heart muscle to keep it nourished and in good running order. But when atherosclerotic plaques grow inside of these arteries then lose their elasticity, they narrow and harden, and with that the optimal blood flow is reduced. And as the blood flow is reduced, so is the optimal oxygen delivery to the heart muscle. And when that happens, the heart muscle screams out in pain, "Help! I need oxygen! I'm starving for oxygen!" That's angina.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I am Dr. Sal Lacagnina. I'm the medical director for Lifestyle Medicine Institute and the CHIP program. And I want to welcome anybody that's new to the program today. And as Hans just said, we're going to talk about heart disease and angina. And just throughout the program, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. And at the end of the program, I'll get to questions. So I want to talk about what's the heart of the matter. And we know that heart disease is the #1 killer, the #1 cause of disability and disease and early death in the United States and most countries, most developed countries around the world. But heart disease is actually systemic vascular disease. And I want you to think about that. This is not just necessarily a localized problem in the heart. It's what I describe, what I call systemic vascular disease, or VD or ED. And this is my joke for today. It's not the VD or the venereal disease that you might be thinking about, or the ED, the erectile dysfunction, although that is the canary in the coal mine. But what we're talking about is vascular disease and endothelial dysfunction. And we'll bring up a picture of what a blood vessel looks like from the inside out. And this is something that I've shown you before. Now, starting from the left of the picture to the right of the picture is the progression and what actually happens when hardening of the arteries developed. As Hans mentioned, when the hardening of the artery develops, there's decreased blood flow. When there's decreased blood flow, that's when the muscles or all of the cells start to become starved from oxygen. They don't have enough oxygen, and that's when the vessel gets narrowed, as you can see in the picture, and that's where the problem comes in. We have another picture that shows risk factors. So this arch is really interesting because it shows that age and gender are actually on the bottom of the arch. They are risk factors for heart disease, but you can see triglycerides, obesity, diabetes, smoking, LDL, high blood pressure, inactivity, stress, and genetics. And again, genetics is on the bottom of the arch, and I'll talk about that more, is the disease, because a lot of people will say that, well, I just have a family history of heart disease, so it must be genetic. Well, that's actually not the case, and we will talk about that today. So there are significant risk factors, and we're going to show a few more pictures, which shows that a lot of the risk factors have to do with the standard American diet and the standard American lifestyle. And in the upcoming pictures, we'll actually, they really just get into the fact that showing that what we do on a daily basis really has a tremendous impact on what happens as far as disease or health. And one of the pictures here, this is the standard takeout food, if you will. You can see everything is packaged in brown, colorless boxes. The meals that are there are high in fat, high in calories, high in salt, and obviously disease-producing. One of the next pictures that comes up is really just a mishmash of all the foods that people eat in America on a regular basis. You can see the burgers and the hot dogs and the pizza and the pepperoni and all the fried onion rings and fried French fries. So these are the types of foods, because they're, again, loaded with saturated fat and sugar and salt, that really contributes to the heart disease. And then the standard American lifestyle. This picture is not meant to disparage anyone. You find these pictures online all the time, but the standard American lifestyle really contributes to the adults being overweight and the kids being overweight. And I think I mentioned this on the last program when we talked about diabetes. So many children now are becoming obese that they develop type 2 diabetes, and they will, over time, in the short time period, develop heart disease, because heart disease is the #1 killer of people with diabetes. We're going to look at another clip now, a video clip on the Ansel Keys study, which really compares countries and diet and lifestyle. So we'll take a look at that next, and we'll go on from there.
Let me share with you something about this famous man, Dr. Ansel Keys, considered by many the father of epidemiology. In a monumental population study, he observed over 12,000 middle-aged men in 7 countries over a period of 10 years. Countries with diets high in saturated fat, coming mostly from animal products, and with diets high in cholesterol, coming exclusively from animal products, had also high cholesterol numbers and high rates of heart disease. Conversely, countries with diets relatively low in saturated fat and low in cholesterol had also low blood cholesterol and low rates of heart disease. When they looked at differences in the average blood cholesterol levels between these different population groups, they found that 80% of that variance could be explained by differences in their usual diet and especially in their amount of saturated fat. You know, during his 10-year study, Dr. Keys found that the rate of fatal heart attacks in Finland, for instance, was 14 times more common than in Japan. Well, what about the cholesterol levels? The Finns averaged about 264 or 6.6. The Japanese men at that time averaged only 144 or 3.6. That's about half the amount between those two countries. What about the saturated fat? The Finns then consumed 22% of their total calories as saturated fat. The Japanese then averaged only 3%. And interestingly enough, while most Western diets today contain close to 40% of their calories from fat, the Japanese diet, on the other hand, then contained only 10%.
So when you really start to look at the numbers and you look at the statistics, they really are staggering. We're actually going to do 2 polls, one that will question you on where more fat comes from when we look at beef and salmon and chicken. And the other question in the poll is, what's the good cholesterol? What value does is that as far as the cholesterol numbers? So we're going to take those polls. And we'll get the information, the answers up on the screen in a minute. But again, getting back to the statistics, we know that 25% of all myocardial infarctions, all heart attacks, occur in individuals that have cholesterol values, total cholesterol numbers between 180 and 210. These are not really, really high numbers, but what it really shows you is that as the cholesterol numbers start to creep up and they get around 200, which in the past physicians would often say, well, 200 is not bad, you know, it's not a tremendously bad number. We know that 25% of all heart attacks occur in individuals that have a total cholesterol between 180 and 210. So that's the reason for really focusing on what you eat, how you exercise, how you live, to really get those numbers to a goal range. And it's really interesting to think about what animals or what organisms have a normal cholesterol and a normal LDL. And what we find is that when we look at neonates, kids that were just born, so we really haven't messed them up yet, they have an LDL cholesterol of around 70, and primates do also. So we really want to shoot for the right numbers when it comes to total cholesterol and LDL and HDL. And when we really start making comparisons, we can see that the individuals that have a total cholesterol of less than 180 compared to people that have a total cholesterol of greater than 245, the individuals on the higher end of the spectrum have an 8 times risk of developing heart disease. So those numbers are really essential, and when you're working either with yourself, getting your numbers, or when you're working with your CHIP clients or other individuals, you really want to make sure that you know your numbers, number one, and that you work to get those numbers to normal. The next question that comes up is genetics. So many of my patients have said to me, Doc, it's just a family history. I have heart disease because I have a bad family history. We're going to look next at a video clip that talks about genetics and where that really plays a role. So we'll look at that next.
You know, the strongest evidence then came from migrant studies. Here's again Dr. Ansel Keys and his colleagues at work. They looked at Japanese men, those who had moved from Japan to Los Angeles, and those who had stayed in Japan. If the lower rates in those Japanese were related to genetics, then the Japanese who had moved to Los Angeles should be protected from those American diseases, even though they may have changed their diet and lifestyle. But what they found among the Japanese in Los Angeles was most insightful. They found that these men had not only left Japan behind, they had also left behind their very low fat, their plant-based diet, and with that, they had also left behind their apparent immunity to heart disease. Their fat intake had gone from 10% up to 40%, and their cholesterol had climbed from 154, that is 3.8, to 225, or 5.7. And with that, their fatal heart disease rate had increased tenfold. Heart disease, a disease of genetics or a disease of lifestyle? I think we know better now, don't we?
So yes, we actually do know that genetics plays a much smaller role than lifestyle does. And the poll showed, the question was, which has the most cholesterol, beef, salmon, or chicken? What we're actually finding now, and it has a lot to do with the way the animals are processed, and we really have to understand that animals are processed foods. And when we talk about staying away from processed foods, all animals, whether it's coming from beef or salmon or chicken, are processed foods, and there's a lot of cholesterol and a lot of saturated fats, and we're actually seeing more saturated fat and total fat in chickens now than in beef and salmon. So we really have to be very careful, whereas in the past people would say, well, chicken, white meat, there's not a lot of fat in there. The way the animals are raised makes a tremendous difference. And right now, actually, in relation to this coronavirus pandemic that we're dealing with, we know that there are more viruses in chickens, so it is definitely not a healthy meal. And there are so many contaminants in all of the animal products that none of those animal proteins really create better health. The other question was about the good cholesterol. Most people knew that HDL was the good cholesterol and LDL is the bad cholesterol, so that's great. But really, one of the questions that often comes up in the CHIP programs is when individuals start to switch to a more plant-based diet, they're eating more whole foods, their HDL, their good cholesterol, oftentimes goes down. The reason for that, and the way that you explain that to your clients or your patients, is that when you're eating more plant-based foods, your total cholesterol comes down, your LDL comes down, so you don't need as much HDL. HDL, and actually Darren Morton will talk about this in one of the upcoming clips that we'll see, but HDL is like Pac-Man. Pac-Man basically goes out into the circulation, grabs the bad cholesterol, grabs the LDL, brings it back to the liver so the liver can get rid of it. If you don't have a lot of LDL, bad cholesterol, and total cholesterol circulating in the blood, you don't need as much HDL. So that's really the explanation. And as Hans mentioned, as far as migration, when people migrate to the United States and probably to other developed countries, and they change their way of living and change their way of eating, they develop the same chronic illnesses that we have here. So the studies actually show that it's much more related to lifestyle than genetics. And the relative risk actually for migrating to the United States is that individuals will have a 10 times higher relative risk of developing chronic disease than their home country. So I think in a lot of cases, people should stay where they are when they're healthier. We're going to look at a clip next that really gives you more information about HDL. So we'll look at what Darren Martin has to say about HDL, and we'll talk about the optimal health and optimal circulation.
Whenever I see a road like this lined with rubbish bins or trash cans for my American friends, it always reminds me of the inside of our blood vessels and how they can be lined with plaque. It's well known that high levels of cholesterol in our blood is not a good thing because it increases the formation of plaque within our blood vessels. But it's not just cholesterol, it's also a type of transporter of cholesterol that's very, very provocative. It's called LDL, or bad cholesterol, or sometimes the little devils. We know that high levels of LDL is very provocative of the formation of cholesterol. And in time, it causes our blood vessels to get narrower and narrower, which is obviously a real problem. But there's something we can do about it. Good news. And it involves what we do with our lips. Namely, be very careful what you allow to pass through them. You see, we want to consume a diet that's low in cholesterol and also low in saturated and trans fats. Just so happens that a whole food plant-based diet is just that. In fact, it's only animal-derived products that contain cholesterol. But the analogy doesn't stop there. You see, just like we have garbage trucks that come up and collect the rubbish, our body has inbuilt system that allows it to clean off the debris from the side of our blood vessels. It's another type of transporter of cholesterol referred to as HDL, or good cholesterol, or sometimes the heavenly darlings as it's referred. We can increase the amount of HDL we have within our systems through exercise, and this is why exercise is such an important component for keeping the inside of our blood vessels clean. Also, if you're a smoker, by quitting smoking will also cause your HDL levels to increase. So just to recap, in order to keep our blood vessels nice and open and clean, which is really what we want, it's ideal to keep our LDL levels low and our HDL levels high. And we can achieve that by consuming a plant-rich, foods-as-grown diet, as well as exercising, and if you're a smoker, quitting smoking. Just remember that optimal health depends on optimal circulation.
So optimal health depends on optimal circulation, and everything that we've talked about so far really is getting us back to what I started talking about initially, that heart disease is really systemic vascular disease, and endothelial dysfunction is inflammation on the inside lining of your arteries, as the picture showed. And it's I like the terminology that Darren used, LDL or little devils, and HDL or heavenly darlings. I'll have to use those in the future. That was really cute. But again, focusing on what you eat makes a tremendous difference. Knowing where the fat is hiding in the foods that you're eating makes a difference to whether or not you're going to be on that road towards chronic illness or on the road towards health in general. We have one more clip to look at. We're going to talk about really action plans and things that you should do, whether you're a CHIP facilitator listening to this program, or if you're a CHIP graduate or a current member. Hans is going to give us a short summary, and then we'll come back and talk about that a little bit more and answer any questions that might have come up in the chat box.
So let's just summarize what we have learned so far, and that is that our circulatory system works best when cholesterol levels are kept below the 150 point or less than 3.8. And to reach those optimal levels, here are some 4 guidelines. Number one, reduce processed food because that's where the trans fats are. Number two, reduce animal products because that's where the saturated fat and cholesterol are found. Number three, eat more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains and legumes and some nuts because that's where the fiber is and the nutrients. And that includes antioxidants that can help to neutralize free radicals and upregulate nitric oxide production to protect our blood vessels. And then there's number four. We want to be careful with high-fat meals in general because they not only increase free radicals and reduce the production of optimal levels of nitric oxide, but they also reduce the oxygen-carrying capacity of blood. So, here are your 4 special guidelines then for a healthy heart. And when you do this, you are not only on your way to a healthier heart, but also to a new you.
So let's go over those again. Decreasing your processed foods. That's foods that are in a box or a bag. But again, as I mentioned before, processed animal foods. So any of the meat products, animal protein, dairy, those are all highly processed foods. So that's number one, decrease processed foods. And it really goes along with number two. You said decrease animal proteins. You absolutely do not need animal protein to be strong. You can get the usual 60 to 70 grams of protein that you need from a whole food, plant-based diet. There are so many professional athletes now that are strictly plant-based that really proves that you can be strong and healthy without animal protein. Eating more vegetables and fruits. I always say it that way because you really want to be sure that you're getting a lot of green leafy vegetables, all the different colored vegetables that you can get. Eat some fruits also. Eat the whole fruits because that's where the fiber is and all of the vitamins that come with whole natural foods. And then I really also like to add in the other pillars of lifestyle medicine, making sure that you're active on a regular basis. Put it in your schedule so that you get some aerobic exercise every day and do some weightlifting a few times per week. Then making sure that you're also getting enough sleep. Quality sleep is important. Set an alarm if you have to go to sleep at a certain hour and then wake up at a certain hour so you're getting 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep per night. Managing your stress. At this time, we know that stress is such a problem in life, and finding a way to manage your stress and change the way you deal with the stress because that's really how you manage it. And then purposeful living. Having a reason to get out of bed in the morning, making sure that you have good mental health, that you're lowering your anxiety level, that you're not depressed. And if you are, talk to your primary care physician or healthcare provider about those things. So these are all the pillars of lifestyle medicine that really are incorporated into the teachings of the CHIP program. And again, remember that we have, hopefully we'll get to a point where we can do face-to-face CHIP programs again. We could do it virtually via Zoom, similar to this message today. And then we can also do self-guided CHIPs. So you really want to promote all of those ways of getting the CHIP message out to the people that need it, which is probably most people in America. We have a question coming up. Is hardening of the arteries and arteriosclerosis and heart disease the same thing? The short answer is yes, they are. They're just different terms. But when you talk about heart disease, again, getting back to the heart of the matter is vascular disease, it's endothelial dysfunction, it's hardening of the arteries, all of that plaque that develops in the inside lining of the arteries that causes inflammation, decreases blood flow, and that's what causes the organ dysfunction. And if you have disease in your heart, you absolutely have it in every other area of your body, from your brain on down. I joked around a little bit before about ED, I said erectile dysfunction. That's the canary in the coal mine because blood vessels get clogged up everywhere. So my male patients that complain that they have problems with erections, we make sure that we work those individuals up for vascular disease. The next question about what about triglycerides, good or bad? Well, high triglycerides, generally greater than 150, contribute to more disease, more vascular disease, more liver disease, more pancreatic disease. Triglycerides are oftentimes found in the foods that we eat. If you're eating a lot of processed foods, if you're eating cakes and cookies and such, you're going to be getting more fats in your diet, more triglycerides. So overall, we need a certain amount of cholesterol. The opening clip where Hans was talking about sex hormones, cholesterol is the precursor to all of these sex hormones that we all need to make to be healthy. But when the levels start to get too high, when you have too much total cholesterol, too much saturated fat in your blood, too much LDL, too many triglycerides, all of those things contribute to all of the chronic illnesses that we see on a regular basis. Is there a downside to eating tofu? So we'll say that ask the question as, is there a downside to eating soy products? There really is not. In a very, very small percentage of cases, individuals that eat too much soy may have a problem with their thyroid. But I can tell you, in the 26 years that I've been practicing medicine, I've had 2 patients that have had this problem. So the short answer is no, absolutely not. Dr. Michael Greger did a great meta-analysis of the studies that were done on soy and comparing individuals in Japan. This is where comparing countries makes a big difference. Comparing those individuals to individuals in the United States, where we eat very little soy products. In Asia, they eat lots of soy products. Their rates of breast cancer and prostate cancer was tremendously lower. So the short answer is no. We should all incorporate some soy products into our diet, whether it's tofu or edamame or other types of soy. Is it true that trans fats stay with you for life? Well, like other fats, you metabolize them, so they don't really stay with you for life. But what typically happens is people keep eating small amounts of fats. And I'm not sure if this question really relates to what happens on the inside of the arteries. If you were spending years eating the standard American diet and before trans fats were regulated, the way that trans fats would build up in your system is clogging your arteries. We know that from the studies that Dr. Esselstyn has done, the only way to get rid of that hardening of the arteries, the plaques that are in there, is by getting your LDL cholesterol to around 70, and then the body really starts to clean out the arteries, if you will. So getting to those goals really makes a big difference. I'm seeing a push towards healthy oils by cardiologists. What's up with that? Well, as you probably know, oils, regardless of where they come from, are 120 calories per tablespoon. Oils, regardless of where they come from, are pure fat. So I'm not sure why cardiologists would actually recommend that we have more oil. There are easier ways to cook your food, either with an air fryer or by using some organic vegetable broth. So there are easier ways to cook and healthier ways to cook, especially in our patients that have heart disease or diabetes or other metabolic diseases. It's probably a better recommendation to help them find alternative, healthier ways to cook without oil. So that's the last question. We covered a lot of material today. My contact information will be put up at the end of the session here. If you have any other questions, feel free to text me, to email me, to give me a call on my cell phone, whatever is easier. And in the meantime, remember that what you're providing as a CHIP facilitator and what you're doing as a member of CHIP, either graduate or a current member, is you're changing your life for the better. You're improving your health, you're improving the quality of your life, you're probably being a better role model to the people around you, so you're really spreading that joy, if you will, and you're making it more likely that you will live longer. So I want to wish everyone a good afternoon or a good evening. Thank you for being here. We will see you again next Wednesday at the same time. God bless you all.